Hello and welcome to this Agenda Election Special. I'm Stephen Cole. The UK's third election in 4 years is over, but what message has the British electorate sent to the rest of the world? Boris Johnson's Conservatives are back in power with an unexpectedly large majority.
With this mandate and this majority, we will at last be able to do what? Pay attention.
So is Brexit really now a done deal? And exactly what does that mean for the European Union? And what now for the special relationship? Donald Trump's ready to talk trade as he faces his own 2020 election battle. So, with Boris Johnson back in number 10, what are going to be the political priorities now? And what does all of this mean for the future of the UK, both internally and, of course, more importantly, perhaps on the world stage? With me here in the studio are George Pascoe Watson, former political editor of the Sun newspaper and now chairman at Portland Communications. Lorenzo Cordogno, former chief economist at Italy's finance ministry and now visiting professor at the London School of Economics. And from Republicans overseas, Erol Morkoc. Let's start with you, George. It was billed as Britain's most important election for 70 years. Did it live up to the billing?
Absolutely, no question. And wherever you are in the world, you look at Britain now this weekend and you see a totally different country which is about to change enormously. Brexit will happen. Britain will leave the European Union. You have a prime minister with phenomenal strength now to shape the country in the way that he wants. I have to also say that the Britain's opposition party, the Labour Party, is going to be tearing itself apart. The worst election they've ever had. And critically, the United Kingdom possibly on the brink of breaking up as Scotland faces a very different future, perhaps with an independence referendum just round the corner, and Scotland could break away from the UK.
Indeed, huge gains by the SNP, and we'll talk about that a bit later in the Agenda Special. Lorenzo, what message has the electorate, the British electorate, sent into Europe and, for example, Italy?
Well, I would say for Europe, it's really up to the UK government to decide what's the future. I think it will be hugely important for Prime Minister Johnson to decide over the next few weeks, but certainly by June, because June is the deadline to decide on the extension for the deal, for the trade deal. And I think it's hugely important to decide the strategy. Whether Boris Johnson will go for a kind of skinny deal, if you wish, just services or whatever, or a more comprehensive. And depending on what is the strategy in the UK, the European leaders will react. I think there is a will to kind of find an agreement.
With the new team in Brussels?
Which is in the interest of everybody, I would say.
Okay, Errol, what message to the US and the rest of the world has Boris Johnson and the British electorate sent?
Well, it's sent a wonderful message. I mean, we have been sitting and hoping and praying for something like this to happen, and now that we can move forward with the big USA-UK trade deal, especially when you consider security services, the fact that our agencies share 80% of data, we were very, very skeptical of how we could continue that robust relationship with gentlemen like Mr. Corbyn, who is, a supporter of anti-American groups from Venezuela to Iran and all that. And now that we have this mandate that Boris Johnson has gotten, just like Donald Trump received a mandate from the American people, there's never been a better chance for our two countries to strengthen that bilateral tie and move forward, especially in the world of pharmaceuticals, automobiles, and petroleum, which are our three biggest factors. And keep in mind, we're the number 1 and 2 direct foreign investment in each of those countries, and that's jobs, pensions, and the exact thing that both Labor and Conservatives want, and both Democrats and Republicans want. So it's never been a clear, more bright, opportune time for that.
Good to hear, Errol. But of course, this was the Brexit election. But before I get all your thoughts on that, let's hear from the historian, Sir Anthony Selden, who's written a biography of Theresa May, and which has just been published.
Britain in the last 3 years has been more divided than at any point since the period before the First World War. This is a serious moment in British history. So the hope has to be the country, now that there's a clear path forward on Brexit, will pull together. The risk on the other side is that Scotland will become independent, that Ireland will unify, and that the great promise of Brexit, that the left behind areas would be looked after, that in fact unemployment will rise and productivity will fall. But at best, there's an opportunity now for the country really to come together and play a role on the national, international stage greater than anything happened when Britain was part of the EU. We'll have to wait and see.
We will indeed have to wait and see, possibly until January the 31st, but I suspect, George Pascoe, it'll be earlier than that, because he's going to have to start the ball rolling over Christmas, isn't he?
Oh, there's no question. Parliament will start sitting in the beginning of next week, a couple of days' time, and we will be right the way through the week, running up to Christmas and even into Christmas week. This Prime Minister has now got a mandate, he has an agenda, he is determined to focus on, firstly, Brexit, and then shaping his own government, and shaping the Conservative Party, actually, which is a big job. Don't forget, for viewers abroad, what Boris Johnson has done here has swept to power on the back of voters who have never voted for the Conservative Party, for a right-wing party in their lives, and neither have their ancestors before them.
So just poking on that point, before I come to Lorenzo, 3.9 million new voters registered in October. Most people thought they were young people, most people thought they would all vote Labour. Are you saying possibly they didn't?
What I'm definitely saying is that Labour traditional supporters voted Conservative this time. Some of the new registrars definitely voted Conservative. Some of them didn't vote at all. The critical thing is, can Boris Johnson keep hold now of this massive coalition of British people for the next election, which will be perhaps not in 5 years' time? He's going to change the law so he can go to the country anytime he wants. And can he then also, at the same time, rebalance Britain's standing in the world? Is he going to come close to America in a way that we've been talking about with Erol? Or is he going to side more with China? And there is a divide and a debate to be had.
All right, well, we'll come to see what Erol thinks of that. But Lorenzo, what will economists make of this? Is this a good vote for the British economy? And how will the relationship, do you think, change economically with Europe?
Well, in the near term, I think there might be some kind of rebound in activity, because I think this whole uncertainty about Brexit has probably stopped investment activity, decision-making by companies and so forth. So I think in the near term, there might be some kind of rebound. Over the long term, Brexit is definitely a negative for the UK economy, but again, it depends on how policies shape up. I mean, there is a chance for the government to kind of turn into a positive scenario, but again, it depends very much on policies. By default, the UK economy will become less open, than in the past. But again, there is a chance to reopen the economy in the future.
The opposite view is, actually, this gives the Prime Minister a mandate to be much more open with the rest of the world, and also to rewrite our own laws and regulatory regime so that we take advantage of no longer having to go at the speed of the Europeans. And that's what Boris Johnson's all about. And time will tell, but that's his win.
Yeah, that's definitely. But unfortunately, we live in a world in which size matters. Sure. So a UK will be a much smaller country with much less leverage internationally, and then it might become more challenging for the UK Prime Minister to muster a good deal. But again, there is a chance.
Never underestimate Boris Johnson.
Absolutely. That's the lesson. That's a good lesson, and people did before this election. Perhaps let's remind ourselves, I want to come to you, Erol, let's remind ourselves of one of the earliest international tweets that Mr. Johnson received from Donald Trump, which he posted very early this morning. And he said, "Congratulations to Boris Johnson on his great win. Britain and the United States will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit. This deal has the potential to be far bigger and more lucrative than any deal that could be made with the EU. Celebrate, Boris. Well, that all seems to be more than 140 characters to me. But so he's pretty clear, Errol, the US-UK deal to be done. What do you think that might look like?
I think that obviously with some of the hot button issues, especially with the NHS and certain things where he's had to get educated about what a sensitive topic that is, I think it's going to, as I said, focus on some of those key sectors in pharmaceuticals and automobiles, but also looking at the sort of changing sort of economic environment when it comes to drug prices. Keep in mind, a lot of drugs around the world, Americans, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, we're paying 5 times more, and we're subsidizing not because, you know, we're good or bad people, but just through the pharmaceutical industry.
That was a very sensitive part of the election campaign.
Yes.
Is the NHS on the negotiating table? Do you think that was that fake news, or is there some validity to that accusation?
The American strategy, I'm sure as we all know, is we throw the kitchen sink at a debate, and then we work backwards. And once we sort of understood the extreme sensitivities, there's room for work there, especially in the trade of pharmaceuticals.
Oh, hold on. What do you mean there's room for work there?
Well, there's room for work to find out what exactly is acceptable compared to what we want. Now, obviously, we would like to have a robust relationship in healthcare, but we don't want to offend our greatest allies, best friends in the world, and certainly understand those sensitivities. With that said, there is also a room for a very robust universal trade agreement that could incorporate smaller things that wouldn't be offensive or, you know, create too much consternation, as long as we work with Boris and we're sort of considerate of these things.
They obviously have a good relationship, George.
Well, the reality on trade and things like the pharmaceuticals is that the world of pharmaceuticals is way more advanced now than it was 20 years ago when the NHS and pharmaceutical last time that the trade deal was discussed. And it's only right and appropriate that the NHS gets the very best treatments, the very best drugs possible, and that does require a new negotiation with US and other suppliers for that matter.
Yeah.
Okay, George and Errol talking, and the man in the middle, Lorenzo, where does all this leave European trade with the UK?
Again,
Because it's clearer with the US, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's clear. I think it's challenging with, you know, any kind of counterparty around the world, because everything is up for negotiation now. So it depends. On the negotiation with the EU will be critical, and I think now it's a done deal that the UK will be out of the EU by the end of January. But then there will be another uncertainty that will open how the UK see itself in the future. In the relationship with the EU, that is still to be defined. I think Boris Johnson was deliberately kind of ambiguous in the electoral campaign. I think now has to kind of clarify the position and to kind of clarify the strategy. Again, a comprehensive deal with the EU would not be hugely difficult, but needs to be indicated already now over the next few weeks, in order to make sure that everything goes in that direction.
And Brussels, are they more ready to negotiate on trade than they were previously?
I think there are some red lines. In other words, I think there's no way that UK can actually negotiate, again, a skinny deal on services only without any kind of counterpart on labor mobility. Okay, let's face it. And let's face it that there are many other aspects, many other sectors. So if the UK goes for a comprehensive deal, I think there will be a very, very open attitude in Brussels. Otherwise, you end up with some more difficult negotiations, which might actually produce also some additional uncertainty. But again, it will be, the first step will be very much up to Boris Johnson.
I think that Boris Johnson's strength now, with his phenomenal strength here in the UK, is that he will turn up in Brussels differently. And I think he will be much more robust. That's not to say he's going for a hard Brexit, but he will be much more robust and empowered to do so than I think Brussels expects.
Well, a lot more confidence. And we'll come back to you in a moment, gentlemen. Thank you very much. But still to come here on this agenda election special, a question of nationalism. Will Scotland still be part of the UK by the time of the next election? And what does Boris Johnson's victory mean for UK relations and trade with China?